Welcome back to the Jewish Question on the Meaning of Catholic Guild stream. This is part 19 of a series we've been doing since it started during the controversy when Pope Francis made comments about the Epistle of the Galatians, and then some rabbis complained to him, and then the Vatican said, "Oh, well, we're not really that serious about St. Paul." At least this was what was insinuated. And I'm very happy to have my new friend, Will Tucker, with us today. Will, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I know Will because my good friend Theo Howard has got to know Will, and he's had a lot of podcasts with him. And the Jewish Question is, of course, a great mutual interest to me and Theo. And then Theo introduced me to Will Tucker. So I've just been taking in some of your content, Will, but unfortunately, I with my new job, I don't have as much time for podcast intake, and you have a ton of content, and I haven't even been able to take a lot of it in yet, just a little bit. So yeah, I really love to get to know new people and their ideas and a little bit about them. So this is going to be part of this Jewish Question series that we've been producing on Meaning of Catholic. Guild members, if you want that full series, it's like 18 plus hours plus this series. And I have 2 other hours recorded, but I haven't released yet because the next focus we're doing is really focusing on the modern state of Israel in particular, because the 18-hour series has been mainly a broader view of 2,000 plus years of history. So, Will, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more first before we get into all these controversial hot topics. So you're a Kentuckian. Is that what you call yourself, a Kentuckian?
Yes, that's the nomenclature.
So you're a Kentuckian, but you grew up in Ohio, or you lived there too?
No, I'm born and raised in Kentucky. I went to grad school at Ohio State. So,
Oh yeah, you said it was like
yeah,
art something, right?
yeah, I have a background in visual art, regrettably, but it did provide me with a perspective on sort of contemporary issues and politics and aesthetics and things that are relevant to particularly the Jewish question.
Yeah.
And politics in the church and the
That's
crisis of the 20th century and things like that. So yeah, I was only in Ohio for a couple of years. I lived in Nashville, Tennessee for a while too. So, but my family's native to Kentucky. We've been here since before it was a state. So very,
fantastic. Okay.
very near and dear to my heart.
Strong roots. That's great. I love my own state as well. But so, and were you raised Christian then, like some kind of Baptist? Now, Michiganders like myself think everybody in the South is Baptist except for Flannery O'Connor. So, were you raised Christian at all?
Almost. Yeah, in a Protestant denomination, the Christian church, I think it's like came from the disciples of the Church of Christ, like Stone Campbell movement. It's a mega church denomination. So the church I grew up in slowly became a mega church by the time I was in high school. And then I kind of fell away from any semblance of the faith during my college years, and then found my way back here through first back to, just openness to Christianity, and then to the Catholic Church, just through reading the Bible and studying history.
Okay. Well, fantastic. So, and you became Catholic in what year did that actually happen? It was like 3 or 4 years ago, right?
Very recently, going on 3 years, so summer 2022.
Oh, okay. So, and what was it like because you're attending the FSSP parish, right? If I
Yes.
recall what you said to me. So did you go like straight into the trad movement from confirmation, or did you kind of like find that after you became Catholic?
Well, it's a bit convoluted. My wife became Catholic until 2018. She stayed in RCIA for a couple of years, and at that time we were attending a Novus Ordo parish, so she came in through the Novus Ordo, and I went with her every Sunday and took our daughter with us for several years, and then finally late 2019, early 2020, we just had a miscarriage, and I was really, struggling emotionally and spiritually. And I decided it was time for me to come into the faith. So that was February, March 2020, and then suddenly the world changed, and everything I was learning about the faith and how things have always been certainly were not so anymore, and we're not going to have the sacraments, and we're not going to meet every Sunday, and yeah, it just felt very contrary to my perception of what Catholicism was to be. And I didn't even know anything about the traditional Mass or Vatican II at that point. And so, sort of through my research of conspiracy, and briefly in like 2013, I first went down the rabbit hole of 9/11 and Aleister Crowley, and a lot of the kind of typical conspiracy roots that people end up in. And that's when I first began to see like the truth of Christ, and how the conspiracy of the New World Order, or whatever you want to call it, is aimed against Christian civilization and Christ particularly. So it took me a while, and I kind of put those things aside because I lost, like a lot of people who wake up to conspiracy issues, they become like a deer in headlights, and it's all they can talk about.
Yeah.
And I became one of those people for a while, and I was in academia, I was teaching, and quickly I lost all my teaching opportunities. And so I realized, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how to compartmentalize this to be able to live in the world. And so once 2020 rolled around, I'm like, hey, this rings a bell. This seems like what I was, what I've learned already about the nature of the deep state and the conspiracy against Christ. And so yeah, we left. So I was like, obviously this isn't the place for us. You can't have to wear a mask, and they're already pushing vaccines, and this is also the George Floyd stuff is going on, and that's really being promoted. So it took us about, I ended up reading the Bible during COVID, and I thought I could kind of crack the code and figure out, the book of Revelation, eschatology on my own. When I realized from reading the Bible is like, there's no way I can understand this on my own. And so from there, I began to understand why the church, has a magisterium, and why it's important for there to be, tradition and hierarchy and that kind of thing. And from there, I think I found Taylor Marshall, maybe was the first thing I found that introduced me to the traditional Mass, and, the crisis and revolution of the church in the 20th century. And from there, I located a FSSP parish, and I immediately started into instruction classes to be confirmed.
Oh, okay. So you got confirmed in the FSSP yourself, but you had already been like Catholic, married to a Catholic, and going
Right.
through this. Okay. And what really struck me about that, Will, was my friend who did we have a guild series called Christ Against the Occult, and it's the history of occultism. And he told me, because he was really into the occult a lot, and he told me what struck him was that all these occult movements are all against Christ from different angles and everything. It sounded is that and that was like one of the proofs that, well, Christ must be the truth then, because all these different ones are all against him. It sounded like you may have experienced something similar to that back in 2013 when you started getting into this. So can you elaborate on more, like getting into 9/11 and then Crowley and all these roots of conspiracy, quote unquote, theories? How did that lead you to Christ?
Yeah, I just, I guess prior to that awakening, if you want to call it that generically, I, was in the contemporary art world. I had this very relativistic sense of like good and evil. Yeah, what my experience sounds very similar to what you're describing with your friend. And I thought that, of Christianity, that it's a tradition that teaches people, like amongst other traditions, it teaches people, basics of morality, and, it serves a kind of utilitarian social function. But beyond that, there's no, intrinsic, transcendent truth or reality there. And then once I began to so, I'm in the art world, and if you know much about contemporary art, it's very much a celebration of everything that's aberrant, upside down, and evil, against the the Western roots, the traditional roots of aesthetics, from
Yeah.
from the Middle Ages. And now it's very much about negation and Marxism and disrupting the status quo, and rubbing your nose in sort of the ugliness of contemporary life. So, and I just things I'd witnessed, like there seemed to be, for lack of a better word, a kind of glass ceiling in my own art career that kept me from being able to break through or make it in New York, or have any sort of gallery representation. And I was trying to put my finger on what that was through sort of bumping into people who had broken through. And I realized there's a kind of unspoken bond that they have. There are a lot of films and stuff that, sometimes you get invited to parties and they put on some really disturbing music or disturbing films. Like there was a film, Lars von Trier's The Antichrist, that was really popular at that time. I'm not sure if you've seen that. I don't recommend anybody watching
No,
that.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, okay, everybody has to like this. Everybody has to reference this and watch it. And it's an important touchstone. And I realized, like, why is this sort of the bonding? It's almost like a form of initiation. That's they're testing people to see who's open to this kind of thing and who has an appetite for it. And so once I had a brief period when I was kind of questioning. I was in between 1-year contracts and my teaching career, and we wanted to have a family, and I felt like, without that job security, it wasn't going to be a possibility. So, I had some downtime. I watched one of these 9/11 truth documentaries, and I was like, wait a second, this makes sense. Like, of why is there just this permanent corruption within politics, and we can't really put our finger on who's in control of things, and there seems to be this hidden oligarchy that's behind the scenes rigging things, and there's no, all the social justice movements that we think, they always sort of fall on their face. And yeah, so anyway, yeah, whenever I like, and then also the horrifying thing was like seeing the way the Twin Towers fell and the manner in which they fell, and how the scientific impossibility of that, and how it's in broad daylight, in plain sight, and how I've just missed it for the last, this is the most important event of my lifetime. It happened my senior year of high school and sort of shaped my entire, adult life. Like, not like seeing it in this new way, and like they're tempting you to recognize it. And it's like this artificial reality that we're being initiated into through seeing something that's physically impossible, in the narrative that's attached to it. And then from there, it's that form of magic is what I'm trying to get to. So, then, I went down some YouTube rabbit holes and found like Aleister Crowley, and I realized, like, okay, this is connecting a lot of dots within the music industry and the art world that I've seen before in this sort of magical occult tradition that's never really fully revealed, but always sort of slightly referenced. Yeah. So and then from there, it's like, why does it? So there is a for there to be a hidden political force that would perform something like 9/11 on their own people and lie about it as a way to justify wars in the Middle East that led to hundreds or millions of casualties. This is objectively evil and can't serve any like rational function. It's not just about money, I guess, is the realization I came to. It's not subject to instrumental reason. This is something that is more evil for its own sake. And from there, something that can be motivated for evil for its own sake is a kind of magical practice, black magic. It's like, okay, well, then that makes mean that there's an absolute good, and that, this is the reason why, Christ and Christians who I encountered in the art world and in my own experience were always sort of talked down to or treated as second-class citizens, and yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes sense, like kind of an encountering this objective evil that you have sort of an intuitive sense, which you already kind of, your skin was kind of crawling, it sounds like, with all these like initiation kind of things. But it made me think of, I just interviewed a Hebrew Catholic on this channel that was one of the ones that I haven't released yet. But he was like an atheist Jew, and he was also an artist, and he went to Italy, and it was the experience of true art, which was a critical factor in him accepting the faith, accepting baptism. So I was wondering if you could also speak to, was there anything like in aesthetics per se that was part of this whole journey, or did that only come off later, kind of when you're looking at aesthetic history?
Yeah, that was something that I came to later. My sense of aesthetics are so distorted from years and years of studying Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, and the kind of heroes of 20th century art. So it took a lot of unlearning. Like when I took art history classes and stuff in college, it was always just so boring for me to learn, um, classic art and religious art from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, um, just because uh, I had developed an appetite for the transgressive and that which violated social norms, and so to be able to relearn that and understand how beauty fit into the integral order was something that took a long time. And now, like, even if I'm still trying to unlearn these kind of things, and like I've developed like a real aversion to like popular music. I can really only listen to like sacred music right now for some reason. It's just like I don't trust my I don't trust my own instincts in that regard. But yeah, it wasn't like now when I look at like the art of Fra Angelico or something like that, I really have this sense of the sublime and the supernatural, and of I have a very strong aesthetic experience, but I had to like come through understanding the truth of the imagery. Like this is and I think this gets into kind of like, and this is maybe on downstream from what we're talking about here, but issues around iconoclasm. I think that's really built into to contemporary Western aesthetics, is that like it's a new form of iconoclasm that has to destroy any representation of the transcendent, and that's really what's kind of lurking beneath contemporary art. Um, and and so yeah, understanding that the icon reflects a transcendent reality is something that like was a real epiphany for me that I just came to like in the last year or so. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's fantastic. I love getting to know you because it's like I've come to very similar conclusions in my own study. Like my book says that it's like I think one of the most important things to understand about the 20th century controversy, or the 20th century in general, and the liturgical controversy in particular in the Catholic Church, is that it is a new iconoclasm, which is really like the third big manifestation after the Protestant revolt. So I'd love to talk more about that. Um, but let me ask you one more important question before we get into more Jewish stuff like that. And that is like, what is the you mentioned the Bible, which is obviously the best book ever, but what is like one Catholic spiritual book that really influenced your spiritual life? What's really impacted you as you learned how to pray and you went from nominally Protestant to Catholic liturgy? What's like one book that's been a big one that you would recommend?
Um, Probably early initially would be like the Imitation of Christ, I think. Thomas à Kempis, and
Yeah.
then City of God, obviously is a big one. Uh, St. Francis de Sales, someone that I read for spiritual guidance quite a bit. Um, yeah, I would say those are the big
That's
ones. Yeah,
It's fantastic. That
yeah,
that was exactly the same, not exactly the same books, but Imitation of Christ. That's like one of my favorite. My
yeah.
wife bought me my first ever copy of back when we were friends years ago. Um, yeah, the text is nothing like it. And so you're already in this sort of looking at conspiracies and whatnot. Now, let me um I want to throw an idea at you and see what you think because um yeah, like for me, I'm very similar in the sense that at some point before I was Catholic, I really got into, I think I did watch some 9/11 controversy. And I don't really have an opinion on that because I just haven't studied it well enough and I'm not very good at science. So I can't like make a scientific argument anyways. But um, it certainly, I believe that it was certainly possible and a plausible, reasonable explanation to say that it was a false flag and etc. So I just sort of believed that there were conspiracies going on. But it seems there are limits academically, kind of, or epistemologically speaking, as to how much evidence do we really have for particular controversies. Like going from, we've got all this circumstantial evidence. We've got an indication here and there that this guy's in on it, that guy's in on it. This guy might even explicitly say, like, Donald Rumsfeld has a meeting on 9/11, says, we're going to go after Saddam because of this thing. So, like, we know that something was going on. So Um, I guess my question is, how do you evaluate and how do you conclude that there is a conspiracy? Like, how do you evaluate evidence? Um, how do you come to the conclusion that there's definitely a conspiracy involving A, B, C, D, E, F, G actors doing X, Y, Z? And then where do you say, well, we don't really know exactly everything that's happened? You know, I don't know if I'm asking this well. Do you get what I'm getting at? Like, what are the epistemological framework here?
Yeah, I mean, I think foreknowledge is a big piece of it. And I think one of the other it's hard to represent this, and I don't think I did a very good job earlier when I introduced this idea of 9/11. But a lot, I talk a lot about the Jewish question, but I also specifically I study the Kabbalah, which is sort of the mystical tradition embedded within post-temple Judaism. And what the Kabbalah focuses on is violating the limits of what is ontologically possible as a kind of messianic process, the
Right.
Tikkun Olam.
Like
So
Shabbatai V did that, right? He was like the false messiah who wanted to break the commandments.
sure, yeah, like the redemption through sin, it's actually a Talmudic principle from I think a second century rabbi named Reish Lakish. It says the violation of the law is the fulfillment of the law. So, and that's one of the, this is a tangent, but like a lot of times when you start bumping up against this issue, we're talking about the Kabbalah, there's a kind of false dichotomy that's presented between Orthodox Judaism and Talmudic Judaism or mystical or Kabbalistic Judaism as if they're like separate factions. But all these things are, I mean, Judaism is a tradition that